Welcome back to 3 Inquisitive Kids. In this video, we will be learning about subtraction with rational numbers. Our learning goal for today is to subtract with rational numbers and understand the relationship between addition and subtraction. Our course outline for Unit 2 has 12 lessons in it. It ranges from rational numbers to using calculators to calculate. We are on our 5th lesson of the unit, which is 2.5, subtracting rational numbers. Because in our previous 2 lessons, it was both 2.4, because there was a part 1 and part 2. Today we're going to master subtraction rules of rational numbers. How do you subtract rational numbers? And we're going to be able to identify the relationship between subtraction and addition. Introduction. At a national park, the temperature below the mountain is 5 degrees Celsius, and the temperature on the mountain is -5 degrees Celsius. Can you find the difference between the two temperatures? Here we have 2 thermometers. Can you tell from the thermometers the difference between -5 and 5 degrees Celsius? And how would you express this in mathematical terms? In mathematical terms, we would express it as 5 minus -5, which equals 10. 5 is the minuend because it's the larger number, and we're going to subtract the smaller number from it, which is -5 in this case. And we know that 5 minus -5 would equal 10 because based off of this thermometer, we can see that 5 is 5 units above 0, and -5 is another 5 units below 0. So 5 plus 5 added together will equal 10, and that is the distance between 5 and -5. We know that 5 plus 5 equals 10. So if this equals 10 and this also equals 10, it means that 5 minus -5 equals 5 plus +5. Here we can see that this thermometer is essentially a number line if you look at it sideways. So we're basically trying to find the distance between 5 and -5 on the number line. Here we have 2 equations. -3 plus +10 equals +7, and -2 plus -8 equals -10. And here are 4 problems for you guys to solve. For the first one, we have +7 minus +10. Here we can see that we're basically just subtracting -10 from both sides of the original equation. So we're going to be left with -3 on the other side of the equation. And for the second problem, we have -10 minus -8. Here we are just essentially subtracting -8 from both sides of the equation. So we're left with -2 on one side. For the third problem, we have +7 plus -10. Now we're not subtracting a +10, we're adding a -10. So would that make any difference? No, it's still -3. And for the fourth one, we have -2. Here you can see that we've changed the signs as well. We turned this subtraction into addition, and we turned this negative sign into a positive sign. So we're still resulting with -2. Well, how are both sides of these equations equal? What changed, and does this change your way of thinking about addition and subtraction? Here we have +7 minus +10, which equals +7, adding -10. And -10 minus -8 equals -10 plus +8. You can see that the left side of both equations is subtraction, but the right sides of both equations are addition. This is because adding a negative number is the same thing as subtracting the absolute value of it. So if we're going to change this negative sign to a positive sign, we also have to change the sign of the subtraction. In this case, it's 10. So we're going to change it from +10 to -10 in order for this to be an equation. In subtracting rational numbers, if we're going to turn this subtraction into addition, we also have to change this positive into negative. I'm not sure why it says negative to positive. It should be positive to negative in this case. In here, we're going to turn this into subtracting into adding. So the second term, the subtracand, will be turned into its additive inverse. In this case, the opposite of negative 8 is positive 8. So negative 10 minus negative 8 equals negative 10 plus positive 8. So our conclusion is adding a negative number is the same as subtracting its additive inverse. The expression would be a minus b equals a plus negative b. We're changing this from a minus sign to a plus sign. When we change the signs, we also had to turn b into its additive inverse by adding a negative sign in front of it. What numbers should be filled in the following brackets? For the first problem, we have negative 2 minus negative 3 equals negative 2 plus positive 3. If we're going to change this subtraction into addition, we also have to change this negative 3 into its additive inverse. For problem 2, we have 0 minus negative 4, which equals 0 plus positive 4. For the third problem, we have negative 6 minus 3, which equals negative 6 plus negative 3. And for problem 4, we have 1 minus positive 39, which equals 1 plus negative 39. Subtracting a positive number is the same thing as adding a negative number. Here we have another 4 problems. This one should be easy. 0 minus 8 equals negative 8. Number 2 is negative 5 minus 0, which equals negative 5. 30 minus 0 equals 30, and 0 minus negative 15 is 15. Any number minus 0 is still the original number, and 0 minus a number is the opposite of this number. You can see that when we subtracted positive 8 from 0, we turned this positive 8 into a negative 8. And when we subtracted negative 15 from 0, we turned this negative 15 into its additive inverse, which is 15. I want you to calculate these 4 expressions. For the first one, we have negative 3 minus negative 5, which gives us positive 2. The second one, we have negative 7. In order to make a calculation easier, we turn this subtraction into addition. So we're left with 12. And for the fourth one, we get negative 8 and 3/4. And we have even more practice. Fill in the blanks. Negative 4 minus negative 3.2 equals negative 4 plus positive 3.2, which equals negative 0.8. And here we have negative 35 minus positive 12, which is essentially adding a negative 12. So we're going to add the absolute values together. 35 plus 12 gives us 47, and it has to be negative, so it's negative 47. So our answers for this first half of the practice is 3.2 and negative 0.8 and negative 47. So these are the answers. 3. Find out whether the following statements are true or not. Explain. When adding rational numbers, the sum must be greater than the add-ins. That is false. What if we're dealing with negative numbers? When subtracting, the min-win, which is the number that's getting subtracted, must be greater than the subtracand. So if we have a minus b, a would be the min-win and b would be the subtrahend. And that is not true. We can have, for example, 3 minus 4, and we get a negative 1. The difference between two numbers must be less than the min-win. And that is also false, because we can have 3 minus negative 4, which gives us positive 7. When you subtract 0 by any number, the difference is always negative. That's not true, because if we're subtracting a negative number from 0, it's going to turn into a positive number. That is also not true. 5. The greater number minus a smaller number must have a positive difference. And this is true. We have the highest mountain in the world, which is Mount Everest, and it has an altitude of 8,848 meters. The altitude of the Turpin Basin is negative 155 meters deep. How much difference is between the two heights? So sea level would be considered 0 in height, and Mount Everest is 8,848 meters tall, and the Turpin Basin is 155 meters deep. So in order to find the difference, we will subtract the smaller number from the bigger number. We're going to turn this into addition to get 9,003 meters. So the answer would be the difference between the two heights is 9,003 meters. Number 1, clarify the meaning of the question. What is this word problem telling you to do? Are you going to be adding and subtracting? What are the values it's given you? And then you're going to write it out in mathematical terms. You have to list the correct formula or the correct equation. And then you simplify the expression or equation. And then you have to answer the problem. You have to answer it using labels, and sometimes you can use a full sentence. Example 3. We are given that the rational numbers a is less than 0, b is less than 0, and the absolute value of a is greater than b. Try to determine the sign of a minus b. So is it going to be positive or negative or 0? So let me first write out our given values over here. We have a is less than 0, b is less than 0, and the absolute value of a is greater than the absolute value of b. And try to determine the sign of a minus b. If we know that a is less than 0, it means that a is negative. And b is less than 0, so b is negative. And the absolute value of a is greater than the absolute value of b. That actually means that a is more negative than b, because since its absolute value is bigger, its distance from 0 is bigger. A is actually less than b. It's more negative than b, you can say. So how do we determine the sign of an expression? This is the minuend, and this is the subtrahend. So the minuend has to be greater than the subtrahend if we want it to be positive. And if the minuend is less than the subtrahend, then it's going to be a negative. And we know that a is less than b. So the subtrahend is actually greater than the minuend, which means that we're going to be left with a negative answer. So the answer would be negative. Okay, so this is the end of the lesson. In this lesson, we learned about subtraction with rational numbers. And we learned that a minus b equals a plus negative b. And 0 minus b would equal negative b. And b minus 0 would equal b. And we also applied what we learned to some word problems. So you can see subtraction with rational numbers in action. I hope you enjoyed this video, and be sure to click the subscribe button down below. So see you in the next lesson.